Here we are at part 2, and you'll have noticed this is probably something common to your eyes at this particular time in history, because we have these symbols and these representations in our childhood textbooks. In my childhood K through 12 textbook was this picture that I just mentioned to you before. It's the basic 4 food groups, and it represents American industry. The idea was to eat the American food that the American farmer was producing. And so the cattlemen and the dairymen and the egg council and numerous other interest groups that represent the industries of our food production system got together, and they created, through lobbying, a Department of Agriculture that helps them at times of need and regulates the overall picture. This is not science. This is industry interested in regulations, political, legal regulations to make things work for them. Okay. Then over here we have a group, a new 4 food group. This happened in 1991. It was presented by the Physicians for Responsible Medicine. It was and a number of places where it was represented was to the National Academy of Scientists and Sciences. And so here we have something from the grain universe, and here we have something from the vegetable universe. We have legumes, and we have fruits. This was considered the new 4 food groups. Why? Because there was the realization that we were moving toward billions of more people on planet Earth, and that we needed to consider how to find substrates, true nutrients that I've gone over with you, the true essential nutrients. Where are we going to get them from to feed the world, since we can't actually have beef, steak, or even much in the way of other animal products as part of the world economy of food, right? And so that was presented, and then while I was teaching, I noticed that there was quite the scrap going on, and I want you to take a moment to read these things. So here's an article, and sorry about the fold in the paper. It says that some group wants meat and milk off the U.S. tables. That's not what they said. What they said is that there should be a new 4 food groups in order to feed the world. It's not an attempt to limit anything. It's an attempt to provide adequate nutrients and calories to the entirety of the human race. So, but at any rate, the newspapers made some, how shall I say, some hay with this, and they implicated then the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. So something to consider there. And who is it that replied to this? So in the subsequent articles, we see that the AMA has blasted this advice given on diet. Who is the AMA? So those of you going into healthcare might want to read about the history of medicine in America. The AMA is a trade group, presumably that was supposed to represent physicians back in the early 19th century. And just at the turn of the century, things shifted from homeopaths to allopaths. And so allopathic medicine became the primary form of medicine, and a new AMA sort of overtook the old AMA, and they recreated the, the curriculum of medical schools, and they also created the FDA. So that was something in the somewhere around 1910, 15, and through there. The new AMA took over from the old AMA, and by the 1920s they had lobbied Congress and had created a new organization within the executive branch called the Food and Drug Administration. It was from that particular advance that we have other administrations and departments like the Department of Agriculture. So people got the idea here from the AMA, but the AMA continues to be very powerful. And why isn't the USDA or some other trade group protecting the farmers on this point? It turns out, oddly enough, to be the AMA. And so the idea here is that the AMA is objecting to something that could be considered actually how would I say, meat-free or vegetarian. So as you read on, meats and dairy foods no longer basic. So that's an important outcome. Ultimately, the USDA creates a new chart and urges fewer fats and other types of things. But ultimately, you can read through this. And if we pick up the action a little bit with Dr. Robert Lustig over at UCSF, who's an endocrinologist for pediatric patients, then we'll learn some more things from him about all of this. But the idea here is that there was a compromise made. You can read about it, go to Wikipedia, look it up, read some history about this. But this was one of the early, how shall I say, reorientations of the 4 food groups into this pyramid situation. And nevertheless, you'll notice that a lot of the food is represented here as actually not whole foods. Bread is not a whole food, right? It's something that's made from flour, and mostly in modern times devoid of fiber in general. So if you were to actually take whole wheat berries, or for instance, entire rolled oats, or corn on the cob, or whatever it is, and you had food that actually looked like the food that it is, and prepared it that way, cooked it that way, and had the whole foods, you would have grains. If you were to combine grains with beans, first of all, you would get an increase in omega-3 from the beans. It would make also the protein sort of spectrum of amino acids more complete. So there's that's going on. So I need you to sort of take a look at this and reconsider your options, and we'll go over this throughout the rest of this chapter, these ideas that somebody, not scientifically, has created a compromise. This is one of the more modern versions, and we even get to this thing now that looks a little bit more like the 4 squares, doesn't it? And this is called choosing your plate, as it were, .gov. Again, when it's .gov, be wary. If it's not particularly the NIH or the CDC, .gov might not be science, right? So I'm here to represent science. And so pressing on now to carbohydrates. What's a carbohydrate here on the next page, 908? Complex versus refined, first of all, is an important detail. I would say that bread is not technically food, in my opinion, whereas the grains that produce the bread, that's food. If you like grains, eat the whole grains, and receive the nutrients that would include the fiber. Okay, what do you need this for? You need it for energy. You also need it for the fiber, and there are also some other micronutrients from the vitamin and mineral persuasion that we'll go over, and we're going to go over all the vitamins and all the minerals in their details. So let's take a look at that. Here it says that there are some societies that are low carbohydrate societies, like the Eskimos. I have friends who study the life of the Eskimos up in the state of Alaska and on the islands off of Alaska, and I can assure you that the elders did not rely on just low carbohydrate foods. They had food from the ocean, seaweed. Lots of greens come from the ocean, rife with greens, that ocean. It's a wild territory. Lipids, the main lipids that we need are omega-3 and omega-6, and I'll get into that, and we're going to be considering that with a handout that actually focuses on it. It's Dr. Artemis Simopoulos, who has blessed us. She's now in her 80s, and she has a fabulous paper that I make sure that all of you work with regarding this idea of which are the essential nutrients from the lipid category, omega-3 versus omega-6. And we'll pick that up next in our part 3.